Good morning and welcome to our webcast for the HUD Form 5900, the elements for the annual MTW plan and annual MTW report. This is the first of two webcasts. During this session, we'll provide an overview of the revised HUD Form 5900. A second webcast is available or will be available that includes more information on the applicability and implementation of standard metrics. Many of the questions we have received from the Moving to Work public housing agencies thus far are incorporated in this webcast. And please note that this session is designed primarily for the benefit of MTW PHAs, although it may be helpful to HUD field office and headquarters staff working with Moving to Work agencies. Just some brief logistics. Today's training session is not live, so you can't submit questions to be answered during the webcast. If you do have some questions that you'd like to submit to us during the session, you can email them to us at our MTW mailbox, mtw-info@hud.gov. Any questions that we get will be addressed on HUD's Frequently Asked Questions webpage, and we do have that webpage link on our PowerPoint for today. There won't be any breaks during the webcast, but you can pause the presentation if necessary. You can also rewind to review content or to stop watching and come back to watch it at another time. Just as an overview, the presentation will follow the order of the HUD Form 5900, going section by section through the form. During the session, you should have a hard copy of the new form available to you so you can follow along. And the reason for this is that many pieces of the form are too large or complex to show on the screen during the webcast. So it's important that you do have the form with you. So with that, I'll introduce Laurel Davis and Allison Smith, who will be making the presentation today. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ivan. We're going to start by going over the general instructions for plans and reports. First, let's talk a little bit about section numbering. In an effort to streamline the form, we did away with two sections that appeared in the previous form. So they were the non-MTW information that was formerly Section 3 and the long-term MTW plan that was formerly Section 4. The long-term plan we combined with the introduction, and Section 3 we've eliminated, and if an agency wanted to continue providing that information, they could do it as an appendix to the plan or report. So the sections of the revised form now will be Section 1, Introduction, Section 2, General Housing Authority Operating Information, 3, Proposed Activities, 4, Approved Activities, 5, Sources and Uses of Funds, and 6, Administrative.
In the new 5900, you'll notice that there are both fixed formats and flexible formats. The fixed formats are Sections 2 and Sections 5, 2 on the General Housing Authority Operating Information, and 5 on the Sources and Uses of Funds. For those two fixed format sections, we provide you with Microsoft Excel tables that you need to fill out and provide to us. For our purposes, the information in those Excel files is what we require for those sections. We ask that you send the Excel file itself to us with your plan or report submission. We would ask that you not alter that Excel document at all, but fill out the cells. For the actual plan or report document, there is a little flexibility in how you provide that information. You would need to copy the tables from the Excel document into your plan or report document, but to the extent that you need to change colors or fonts to match how you're providing your document, that's fine with us. The standard metrics are also a part of the form that is in the fixed format. The standard metric tables must be provided with each activity that you have in your proposed and approved activity sections. They need to be provided in the tables that we show, but again, in the plan and report document, you can change fonts and colors. We would just ask that you keep the format of the tables. Similarly to those metrics that you may be providing above and beyond the standard metrics, we would ask that they look as close to the regular standard metrics tables as possible if that's something that you all can do. The fixed formats in sections 2 and 5 are not the only information that you can provide in those sections. Often it's going to be the case where a little bit of narrative to set up the tables or to clear up any confusion may be necessary. So again, while you need to copy and paste the tables into sections 2 and 5, you may provide additional information on top of that. The rest of the form is in the flexible format, so for sections 1, 3, 4, and 6, and any appendices that you may be providing, those may be formatted as the agency, at the agency's discretion. But please make sure that you provide the information that's necessary and that it's clearly able to be found in the document. For submission requirements, the dissemination of the document, as you know, we provide the MTW plans and reports to a number of other areas within HUD, both our working group that's comprised of different program offices and the field office folks from around the country. So it's important that we have the document in a form that's able to be emailed to those entities. So when submitting your plan or report, please submit it in an email to us. It's best if it's in one document. If it needs to be in a couple documents because of some files like board resolutions or those things with original signatures that may need to be scanned, that's okay if those are separate, but to the extent possible, please send one full document with the plan report and all associated appendices. In addition, we would ask that CD or DVD or USB submissions be limited. If it's absolutely necessary that the document can't be emailed, then we can talk with agencies about that and how to maybe get the file size down. So we will accept the CD, DVD, or USB submissions, but we would ask that, again, you email that if at all possible. The file type for submissions should be a searchable PDF or Microsoft Word document. Please do not submit scanned PDF files. The file size becomes very large, and it also makes them a little bit more difficult to review, as we can't, direct the entities in our working group and field office to specific portions easily. When you submit your document, please also submit the Excel files for sections 2 and 5. Again, those are the Excel document that should not be altered. Just fill out the boxes and provide that document separately to us. At the end, when you receive your final approval or acceptance of your MTW planner report, you will then submit a hard copy and an electronic copy of the document to both the field office and to us. That final document will then be the document of record for either your MTW plan or report.
Great. So now let's talk a little bit about the section-by-section instructions. And these will just go into a little bit more detail about some specific guidance on each section. Then we'll go into the individual sections themselves. So first, the introduction. Agencies will be covering short and long-term goals in this section because there no longer will be a separate long-term section of the document. And then section 2, PHAs will use the pre-formatted Excel file, as Allison stated, to complete the tables in this section and copy and paste those tables into the actual plan or report document. The Excel must be provided separately. We won't be able to consider it a complete submission unless we receive the separate Excel file with the plan or report. And as we go through a revision to a plan or a report, we will need you to provide the revised Excel file as well with the revised plan or report submission. If a PHA has historical tables that they want to provide, and I know this is something that we've had a number of PHAs express concerns about, it is quite all right to continue providing those tables. That doesn't mean that they can replace the tables that we require in the new form. The tables exactly as they appear from the new form need to be included in the planner report. But any historical data tables that the PHA has can be included as an appendix in the planner report and then referenced in the body of the document. In section 3 and section 4, the proposed and approved activities, PHAs are reminded that standard metrics will apply both to the proposed and the approved activities. I know there had been a few questions we had received about applying standard metrics to ongoing activities, whether that was really necessary, given some activities have been ongoing for quite a long period of time. But yes, standard metrics will be applicable to all activities, regardless of whether they're new or something that you've been doing for quite some time. We'll be covering a lot more about standard metrics both later in this webcast and then in depth in the separate second webcast. So approved activities. PHAs should arrange approved activities in the order that is on the form. I know we've had in the past, we've just kind of lumped all of the activities together. Now we're going to break them out. So we will arrange them in the order on the form. So that will be implemented activities, not yet implemented, on hold, and closed out. And then PHAs are reminded in this instruction section that anytime you have a significant change to an activity, that will require a reproposal of the activity. So that means moving the activity back to Section 3 of the plan and iterating what the changes, any changes and impacts on participants, residents that would include, and any updated information, authorizations, impact analysis, et cetera. And so that's something that's not a new requirement, something that is stipulated in the standard agreement in Section 7A1H of the standard agreement. There's language specifically that says that the approval only remains in effect until an agency proposes to modify the activity, initiative, or program. So here we're trying to tie down a little bit more specific definition of what that is and then provide some guidance about how you would go about reproposing the activity.
Okay, next will be Section 5 on the MTW sources and uses of funds. This is another one of the fixed format sections. So the MTW PHAs will use the pre-formatted Microsoft Excel tables. You'll provide those again, as Laurel stated, with the initial submission and every revised submission that you provide us. In this section as well, it's a fixed section, but if there are historical tables on sources and uses or anything that the agency had been providing before that they still wish to include, those may be included as appendices to the plan or report. Finally, we have Section 6 on administrative materials. Here is where for the MTW plan or an MTW plan amendment, a board resolution would be submitted. There's no required format for a board resolution. The PHA can just use the standard resolution format that their board normally uses. There are some elements that we require are provided. First, the resolution needs to adopt the annual MTW plan or plan amendment. It should also include the certifications of compliance that are included in the 5900. These are a part of the OMB approved form, so they need to be included exactly as they appear in the 5900. And again, that's we'll go over this again later, but that's those are new from the last form, so make sure that you're using the new 5900 and not the previous version. Finally, the board resolution must be signed by the applicable official. Again, we'll go over that a little bit in more detail later on. For MTW reports, the agency should include the certification of meeting the MTW statutory requirements. There's no prescribed format for this either, but all three that are included in the 5900 must be included. So the wording for that is not directly prescribed, but just that those three areas are covered. For other appendices, we've been discussing agencies can submit a number of different kinds of materials that they find relevant to their stakeholders or that may be useful to HUD as appendices to the plan or report. We allow the PHAs to use their discretion on what to include. There may be some additional appendix materials that must be provided depending on the program that the agency is running. For instance, if an agency has the replacement housing factor flexibility in their agreement and they're exercising the third option in that amendment, they need to provide an RHF plan as an appendix every year in their plan. Similarly, agencies that have a local asset management plan must continue to provide that plan as an appendix every year. So now we'll get into the actual 5900 and the sections themselves. The first being the introduction. It's a pretty brief section. First, we ask that on the cover or table of contents page, somewhere up front in the document, submission dates should be provided chronologically. So for this, you would provide the initial submission date that you provided the document to HUD and any other subsequent revisions. Please provide the date that the document is being transmitted to HUD. So if an agency finished their internal revisions on January 15th, but emailed the document to HUD on January 20th, you would want to include January 20th as the submission date on the cover or table of contents page, because that's the date of record that we'll be using to refer to the document. For table of contents, please include the subsections and sections listed in the 5900. These should be in the same order and same title as provided in the 5900 so that everyone can be sure what they're looking at. Titles of appendices should also be included in the table of contents. Just a title and a page number is all we need for that. And then please provide page numbers for all sections and subsections as well. Next in the introduction, agencies will be providing a summary of their short and long-term MTW goals and objectives. These should be defined clearly in the plan, so the agency should provide their goals in the plan. They should be discrete and able to be identified clearly. Any non-MTW aspects may be included, but they should be clearly delineated as non-MTW. When the agency submits the report that corresponds with the plan, agency should report back on the progress of those short and long-term goals that they defined in the plan. So the reader should be able to look at the report and correlate that information back to what the agency planned to do in their plan. Again, we remind agency that there's no punishment for not meeting goals that weren't met. We simply want to be able to track the direction of the program and to be able to compare the documents and see where the agency planned to go in the year and where they actually ended up.
Okay, now we're going to transition to talking about General Housing Authority operating information. So this is covering your stock, additions, removals, vouchers, waiting lists, et cetera. And this should be pretty comfortable to what you guys remember from the previous form. First table in this section is covering planned new public housing units. So these are units you're planning to add to the inventory during the fiscal year. The table is going to require you to do the development number and name, the number of units by bedroom size, population type, and then whether the units are fully accessible or adaptable. We want to note that the development name and number really should be provided for every entry, and if you don't have that yet available, you can work with your field office to set up a development name and number that you can provide in the plan. So field offices will be able to assist on that. And then the population types are listed on the form. There is a category for other. If you choose to utilize the other category, we would ask that you do give us a description of what that means so we can be cognizant of what type of households will be served through those units. And then in terms of the definitions of fully accessible and adaptable when referring to the UFAS units, we did receive some questions about that, and we've put together some definitions that we have pulled from existing language that's out there on that, and so it is included in the FAQ that's available on our website regarding this form. So we urge you to check that out if you need a little guidance on distinguishing between fully accessible and adaptable. The next table in the section are the units that you'll be removing from the inventory during the year. And here we really encourage you to only list units that you definitely plan to remove during the year. So again, you'll be providing the development name and number, the number of units you're going to remove, and then an explanation for why you're removing those units. And when we talk about explanation, we do mean more than just having one word. Sometimes we will receive an explanation just obsolete, and it's really helpful to be able to understand, I think, both for HUD and for the community that's looking at this document during your public process, that why is it obsolete? What are the issues with the property that lead you to really have a need to remove it from inventory? So next will be housing choice vouchers that you're going to project base during the fiscal year. So there you'll be listing the property name, the vouchers, the number of vouchers that you'll be project basing, describing the project. And when we talk about description of a project-based voucher project, we really mean the number of units, the population that you're serving, and maybe an overview of the unit sizes, if there's going to be services associated with those units, so that we can get a better sense of what we're gaining, I think, by having those vouchers project-based at that property, and not just for HUD, but for stakeholders reading this document as well. We ask that you list the total number of vouchers that you'll have committed at the end of the fiscal year. And just to clarify, we've received this question about what do we mean by committed, and we really mean that at minimum, a commitment is that there's an AHAP on the vouchers. Then the next table in this section will be talking about other changes to housing stock that you anticipate during the fiscal year. And when we say housing stock, we mean public housing, your vouchers, and any local non-traditional units that the housing authority may be operating. I think this section is really helpful for the public to understand and for us because you may have changes that are occurring at points during the year that don't impact your numbers at the start or the end of the year. So, for example, you could have units that are offline for modernization, maybe for 2 months in the middle of the year, but it's a significant number of units. And so it does affect when you're looking at unit month total utilization for the year. So we do want to have an opportunity for agencies to talk about some of the smaller things that will be going on, changes during the year. These don't have to all be big things, but just to help provide context as to the fluid nature of your public housing voucher and local non-traditional inventory during the year. Finally, this section, we're going to talk about capital fund expenditures. And as you'll recall, we went back and forth during the revisions to this form many times about what was an appropriate type of information for us to include in that section. And I think we came to a conclusion that really a general description would be appropriate. And so we've asked that you just provide some general language by development, regarding what your activities are. So if you're putting in new toilets, we don't need to know the number of toilets, but you're doing bathroom renovations would be an acceptable way of letting us know kind of what you're doing with that capital fund money. And when we talk about your capital budget for the year, I know we've talked about this in the past relating to the prior version of the form, but we are really referring to the total amount of your block grant that you're using for capital expenditures. And that may or may not be the same amount of capital fund dollars that you receive through your capital fund grants. Many agencies are using additional funds for capital work. And so in that instance, the capital budget for the year would be higher than the actual award of capital funds.
Next, the agency will be providing leasing information. The first of these is the planned number of households served at the end of the fiscal year. These figures will be reported both as a snapshot at the end of the year and as annualized numbers. There are boxes provided for each of these. So again, this is the number of households that the agency plans to serve at the end of the year, represented as both a snapshot and as unit months. First, this information will be reported or given for the traditional Section 8 and public housing programs. These are just the traditional voucher and public housing programs that you're running with your just single fund budget flexibility. Next, there's a portion for the agency to report or to give planned leasing numbers for their local non-traditional households. There are spots for both tenant-based assistance and property-based assistance here. A property-based assistance would be where the agency is making a capital investment in or for improvements to a property or for acquisition that then is being used for eligible families. Tenant-based assistance would be that ongoing rental assistance that's being provided to the household, either through a service provider or other third party who's administering the assistance. We ask that where there's not a set number of households to be served, for instance, if an agency was giving a lump sum to a service provider to administer housing, we ask that an estimate be provided for total number of households served understanding that this may fluctuate and that the assistance may not be given with a certain number of households in mind, but please make an estimate in this section for that. Next, in the leasing information is the reporting compliance with the MTW statutory objectives. For purposes of this section, the only way to be out of compliance would be if you had received a designation of non-compliant under the baselines notice, which is PAH 2013-02, or if the agency was notified by HUD that they were not compliant with one of the statutory requirements. So those two kind of extreme examples would be the only examples of being out of compliance for purposes of this document here. So if either of those cases are not met, then the agency does not need to provide information in this section. We just wanted to make a note that, again, any substantially compliant determination under the baselines notice does represent compliance with the statutory objective or requirement, and therefore the agency would not need to report in this section of the plan. Next, the agency would give a description of any anticipated issues relating to leasing of public housing vouchers or their local non-traditional units. There's descriptive boxes that are available here for the agency to provide by housing program. Any housing program that won't be fully leased or occupied should have a corresponding description of why that is. It can be a small reason or a larger reason. We ask that you provide anything that is going to result in less than full occupancy or leasing in the program. Agencies should take into account any sort of capital uses or service programming that they have that is going to affect their leasing numbers. Those can also be explained in this section.
Now, wrapping up the plan, covering the waiting list. Just to clarify, an agency should list all of its MTW housing programs when we're talking about waiting lists. There could be some MTW housing programs that do not have a waiting list, and so in that instance you would use the wait list type none, and then you would want to provide an explanation of why there's no waiting list. So you could have a local non-traditional program that's a direct referral program, and so there is no waiting list because someone's just directly referred and then provided assistance. So that would be something to explain in the plan. Also, if you're noting that one of your waiting lists is open or partially open, there should be an entry, a corresponding entry for the population for which the waiting list is open or partially open, and there should be, if you're planning to open the waiting list during the year, there should be a description in the applicable section below about how you're going to manage that and what the plan is for that opening of the waiting list. We do know that many agencies have a large number of site-based waiting lists, and so to the extent that you're including site-based waiting lists as a category, you should make sure that you dedupe those lists so that, to the extent possible, so that the count of households on the site-based waiting list is not artificially inflated with households that are on multiple waiting lists. Now we're going to transition to talking about the annual report requirements. Here, we're talking about other changes to housing stock that would occur during the year. There's an analogous section of the plan. In most of these sections, when you're reporting in the report, you'll want to just take the text that you had from the plan, update it to what actually occurred, and then make sure that you've made it clear the things that didn't occur. And there is no wrong answer if something didn't occur during the year. It's just trying to get an update, comparing back to the plan so that there is that consistency. In changes to the housing stock, if there were units that were added that were not included in the plan, we do want to make sure that those are noted in the report so that it is clear what units were added during the year. And then on capital fund expenditures, again, you're updating what you provided in the annual plan. If the amount of MTW money that went into your capital budget changed, if the actual uses of the money changed, if projects were delayed, we just want to get an update on that by development, similar to what you had in the plan.
Okay, next is the overview of other housing owned or managed by the agency. At the end of the fiscal year, Again, here agencies will have the chance to report on other properties that they may own or manage. There's a list of categories that can be used there. If you are choosing other, again, there's a space to define what you mean by other. So please, if you use other as a category, you must have a corresponding definition of what you mean by other. Next is the actual number of households served at the end of the year. Again, this is a report on how the agency actually did in this category. You'll notice that the boxes for both public housing and Section 8 are removed in this section. That's because we'll be pulling that information from HUD system. So we'll get the voucher figures from VMS and we'll pull the public housing figures from PIC. So the boxes provided are only for local non-traditional units. Again, information is provided as both a snapshot and annualized number, and again, as both tenant-based and property-based assistance. So you'll want to pull the numbers that you provided in the plan section of the MTW plan, pull those, put them in the corresponding boxes, and then report on what the leasing numbers actually were. There's also a section here to report on services-only households. These are those households that the MTW PHA is assisting with their uses of funds flexibility, any services only that are provided to households that are not receiving housing assistance. So we ask that to the extent possible, a deduped number be provided, and we remind agencies of the parameters notice that we would like that only participants at or below 80% of AMI are eligible to receive these kinds of services. So just a reminder there of what the eligible population to report here would be.
So the next couple of tables that we're going to cover are new to this form, but they're really important for us because they're helping us and you as agencies to assess your compliance with the statutory MTW requirements. And so there are 3 statutory requirements serving a comparable number of families as you would have served absent MTW. And so that has been satisfied through the baselines notice, which Allison referenced earlier. But the other 2, we had not had a good formal way of tracking, and so we've incorporated them into this revised form. So the first table is looking at 75% of the families being very low income, which is the second statutory requirement. So you're going to start reporting this information with the fiscal year of your first annual report that's in this new format. So we know that the tables start, I believe, with 2011, and so that was when we were working through revisions to the form, we were in the year 2011. And so the table started with that date, but we recognize you won't be reporting that historical data. You'll be starting with the fiscal year of your first report in the new format. So you'll begin reporting it as applicable. You'll continue reporting it going forward. You will only be providing information on your local non-traditional units. We will pull data on your public housing and voucher families from PIC. Since we have that data, we don't see a need to ask you to report something that is duplicative. So you will just report on local non-traditional families to help us have a record of their income, and we'll be able to assemble a full calculation to assess compliance. The second set of tables, because there's actually 2 tables that comprise this, will be the third statutory requirement, which is to maintain a comparable mix of families by family size. And so here, first you'll calculate your baseline, and then you'll do an annual comparison of that adjusted baseline to your current year's figures. So to calculate your baseline, you'll be looking at your occupancy in public housing and your utilization in the voucher program when you entered the demonstration. And so those would be the same numbers that are used to calculate your initial baseline in the baselines notice for tracking the number of families served. So you would use those same numbers to get your initial baseline. And then you would incorporate any non-MTW adjustments from your time of entry into MTW until the present. And then you would have a raw number of household sizes to be maintained, and then you would convert that to a percentage, and that would become your adjusted baseline in that first table. We understand that there was some confusion about non-MTW adjustments, and so we are asking that you explain what you're utilizing as your non-MTW adjustments in the report so that we can understand those and make sure that we're in agreement that they are applicable. And then just a reminder that once you set your baseline percentage, it really is going to be the same going forward. You won't be changing it frequently. So the second table you'll provide for that comparable mix will be the annual comparison to the adjusted baseline. And so that is, again, very similar in concept to how the substantially the same number of families calculation works in PIH 2013-2. We do want to remind you that the numbers might not add up to 100% if you have rounding incorporated. And that if you're having a 5% deviation, we do need you to provide some kind of justification. The justification is not necessarily a negative thing. There can be some natural flux to your mix of families, and we have had some agencies that have had things occur that really just kind of were natural changes in the community that were impacting their ability to continue to serve a comparable mix.
Okay, next in the report on leasing information is a description on any issues relating to leasing into public housing voucher or local non-traditional units. Again, this has an analogous section in the MTW plan. So what the agency would do would be to pull all of those issues that they provided in the plan and report back here on whether or not those ended up being issues and the extent to which they affected their leasing. So again, we want to be able to match up the information that's provided in the plan with information that's provided in the report. If there were any unanticipated issues that the agency ran into that were not provided in the plan, those should be provided as well, just with the notation that, again, they were unanticipated, not included in the plan. So please note that in the description itself. Next in leasing is the number of households transitioned to self-sufficiency by the fiscal year end. We'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow in the standard metrics section. But here agencies will provide an aggregated deduped figure on the households transition to self-sufficiency according to each locally defined category of self-sufficiency. The metric for this is self-sufficiency number 8 in the standard metrics table. So for each self-sufficiency activity, self-sufficiency number 8 will be cited as a standard metric, and then all of those numbers would roll up to this section. Again, recognizing that there may be some overlap between activities where families are reported more than once, which would be absolutely fine. But for this section, we would ask that you dedupe the household so that one number is provided that's not inflated. Again, we'll talk more about this in the associated webcast on using standard metrics. Finally, in the MTW report, we have waitlist information. Similarly, as to we've been saying, the information of the plan should carry over from the report to allow for easy comparison. So, where necessary, please provide that information.
So now let's talk about proposed activities. So these are the new activities that you're considering for the year and that you're requesting HUD approval for. When you're presenting these activities, all of the required elements from the form should be grouped with each MTW activity. I know we have a number of agencies that find it really useful to provide a summary table of all of their activities, and so often that table will list like the names of the activities, the year that they were initially included in a plan, maybe the statutory objectives that are associated with them. It varies a little depending on the agency. And those summary tables are really helpful. We encourage you to continue including them if you think that they're helpful. But we will need to ensure that all of the elements go with each individual activity when you're presenting the individual activities in the plan. When you're naming a proposed activity, we are going to push going forward to ensure that the names of activities really do, to the extent possible, capture the actual flexibility that's being employed under the activity. We have had some activity names that are more broad in nature and make it a little difficult from just hearing the name to really understand how MTW fits in. And so, as we have a larger audience looking at these documents now, we'd really like the names of the activities to clearly delineate the flexibility when it's possible. And then finally, going forward, we are going to require agencies to number activities. It just really makes it a lot easier when we have to go back and forth about the content of an activity, or when we need to ask a question about an activity, or when you're asking us a question about an activity, just to have something that's quick and dirty for us to refer to the activity by, as opposed to some of the names for activities, which can get a little bit long. We want to note that before proposing an activity in the annual plan, the activity really should be fully developed so that it's ready to implement soon after you receive our approval. If it's still really in a conceptual phase and there's not really enough detail for us to understand how the MTW flexibility is used, how it functions, what the impacts of the activity are on residents and participants, your budget, the community, then it's going to be really hard for us to approve it because we don't have the context to understand the scope and impacts of the activity. So we would ask for additional information, and if we really feel like it's really not been developed enough for the public to understand it during the public process, then we would very likely ask you to remove it and develop it further and take it back to public comment and resubmit it to us as a plan amendment. If there's a question about the level of detail, whether an activity is really ready for proposal in a plan, then we encourage agencies to reach out directly to their coordinator. I mean, we're always available to have those types of conversations, and we want to have that kind of back and forth with you guys. So then we're going to transition into the actual elements. So first, you'll need to provide a description of the activity. When you're describing the activity, you should use enough detail for the reader to understand why it's being undertaken, how it'll function, how it will be implemented. And the actual use of MTW flexibility should be clearly articulated with a bright line being drawn about the changes that you're making using your flexibility. So we want it to be very clear when someone externally reads an activity description, why did they need MTW for this? And that's important, with a broad audience looking at these activities. Second, you're going to describe how the activity will achieve one or more of the statutory objectives. When we say describe, we do mean explain, not just list the name of the statutory objective. And if you do just list the name of the statutory objective, we're going to ask you to provide some explanation to describe that impact for us. Third, you need to identify and discuss the impact of the activity on the stated statutory objective or objectives. And that needs to be more detailed than the initial just kind of description of which statutory objective or objectives is applicable. So here you're going to maybe talk about the primary impacts that you're expecting from the activity. There may be some secondary impacts that are kind of relevant but not quite as much of a focus, and you'll want to have a discussion there about both the primary and secondary impacts. And that should also include potential negative impacts of an activity. So, if you're doing an activity that focuses on very intense services and case management, there's a cost to that, and so a potential negative impact, could be how, if you have more participants than you expect, how that might impact your budget. And so we want to hear kind of a discussion about the things that could be negative too. Negative not being a bad thing, but just needing to understand these are all the impacts that we'll want to monitor for as you move forward with the activity. And then you'll provide a schedule for achieving the stated objective. So here you'll want to talk about the time frame for when you think you will get to the impacts that you believe will occur as a result of the activity. So how you'll transition and then how you'll get to achieving those impacts.
Next, agencies will provide metric information for each proposed activity. Again, we'll discuss this in much more detail in the accompanying webcast on utilizing the standard metrics. But here we would just like to note that standard metrics are applicable to all proposed activities. The agency would look to the statutory objectives or objectives that they cite for the proposed activity, and then provide the applicable standard metrics in that category. So just to be clear here, it's not necessarily just one metric that an agency will be providing. It's all applicable from the section. So very likely in most cases, more than one standard metric is going to be required. We ask that in the proposed activity, agencies provide numerical information for both the baseline and the benchmark. This is similar to how we were requiring the format to go forward in the previous 5900. by providing numerical information. Again, we would say if the numerical information on the baseline or the benchmark is not available, then perhaps the activity isn't sufficiently developed and should go back to the planning stages and be proposed in a future year. So when an agency is proposing an MTW activity, we really expect that all this information is available. Next, we remind agencies that the benchmarks provided should be submitted as annual benchmarks, so you should provide the benchmark that you expect at the end of the plan year. If an agency would like to provide longer-term benchmarks as well, they are able to do that, but for the purposes of the standard metrics, annual benchmarks should be provided. Next, agencies should also describe the projected outcome of the MTW activity for each metric. So this should be provided according to the standard metrics given, or if an agency is providing their own metric, then the applicable description there. Also, we ask, and this is similar to the prior version of the 5900, that the data source from which the metric data will be coming from is provided so that we are aware of the systems that you have in place to track this information. Next, in this, we will go to the need and justification for MTW flexibility in the proposed activity. This is where you will cite the authorizations in attachment C or D that will be used in implementing the activity. Again, citations should be provided similar to in the prior version. We ask that you give discrete citations to attachment C or D and not cite broad sections. Try and hone in the authorization as much as possible. And again, we'll ask not only that you cite the authorization, but you explain why the authorization is needed. So beyond providing just a description of what the authorization is in attachment C or D, you're going to want to talk about the statute or regulation from which you'll be getting relief and why that is necessary to your implementation of the activity. And we did make a note here that the same policy is in place, that the agency commits to making every reasonable effort to cite the authorizations necessary, but to the extent that some fall through the cracks, we'll take care to fix that in later years. Finally, we wanted to cover the additional information on rent reform activities. Again, this is similar to the prior 5900. We define any rent reform activity as a change in the regulation on how rent is calculated for the household. So any policy that's going to affect what the tenant is paying as their rent or tenant contribution. Examples of these include alternate recertification periods, changes to utility allowance schedules, standard deductions, any flat rent or tiered rent program, both program-wide, directed at self-sufficiency or directed at another community that's not self-sufficiency related. We still need all the rent reform information on those activities. So the additional information that must be required is an impact analysis, a hardship case criteria, annual reevaluation for the rent reform activity, and the transition period. The guidance on the HUD website on these materials and how to come up with them is still relevant. This information is very similar to in the prior version of the 5900. Finally, here we just wanted to note that for the annual MTW report, this proposed MTW activity section will be blank. All approved activities will now be moved into the corresponding categories of the approved MTW activity section. So section 3 in the MTW report will just be not applicable. We do ask that the placeholder for the section number and name still be included so that the overall document numbering is not thrown off.
So now let's talk about approved activities. And as you'll note, the name of this section has changed from the previous version of the form. So previously we referred to this section as ongoing activities, and that created a lot of confusion because there were activities that were approved, but that had not been implemented, and so were not truly ongoing. So the title of this section in the new form is changed to approved activities, and then within this section we break the activities out into 4 categories. So implemented, not yet implemented, on hold, and closed out. And so really every activity you're doing should fall clearly into one of those 4 categories. So first, we'll talk about implemented activities. So you will need to ensure that you provide very clearly and explicitly the year that the activity was first approved and first implemented. We recognize that those may not be the same year, and often we get this kind of incorporated into the numbering or the title of the activity, and it can be a little confusing to try to figure out exactly when it was actually approved versus implemented. So we would like that to be very explicitly stated in the new reporting format. The description, we want to just note, really needs to be comprehensive enough that someone who is unfamiliar with the activity can understand the crux of it. Sometimes we do get very short descriptions of ongoing activities or approved activities in the annual plan, and they don't need to be as long as the original proposed description, but they do need to have enough context to understand what the actual activity is, how the MTW flexibility is being employed. The updates on the status of the activity need to be very clearly stated, and so you just want to be very careful not to just simply copy text from the plan, but to make sure it is getting updated to clearly reflect changes in the status of the activity as you move forward with it. And if you have an implemented activity that you are reproposing, so you're moving it back to Section 3 because you have a significant change or modification, a placeholder really could go in this section to note that that activity belongs here, it's approved, but that you have taken it back for reproposal because you are changing it significantly. And we've had concern from agencies in the past about that, if you just simply take the activity out of the approved section and move it back to the proposed section, then there's really no clear statement that it was previously approved. Sometimes stakeholders may think that the activity has disappeared in some way. So it will really help to avoid confusion if you leave a placeholder there just saying to refer the reader back to Section 3. Then not yet implemented activities. So these would be activities that we have approved but you have not yet implemented. You do want to provide the year that the activity was first approved. Again, we need that to be very explicit. And then to describe the activity, again, in a way that is comprehensive enough for someone who's not familiar with it to get a sense of the scope and how the MTW flexibility is being employed. So you'll provide that description in the year approved. You're going to update on the implementation status, and then a timeline for when you think you will be getting it implemented. And we really don't want these timelines to be open-ended. It shouldn't just be one day. It really should be a plan that if this is an approved activity, that you do have a path forward to how you intend to implement it and when. So we're not going to require a specific period of time, but we do want there to be some dates and some evidence that a PHA is actively moving towards implementation of the activity. And then if there were any non-significant changes to the activity, we ask that you would cover those as well. Reference to activities on hold, the third category in this section. So very similar to what's in the not yet implemented activity. Again, you'll be providing the description, the year that it was approved. In this instance, you'll also be providing the year when you implemented it and then when you put it on hold, and why you've put it on hold. Again, you want the years to be very explicit for us and the description comprehensive enough that someone can understand the activity. Then you'll cover the plan to reactivate and the timeline for reimplementation, and explain any non-significant changes. Finally, closed out activities in the plan. This section will include activities that you never implemented. So it will be both activities that you did implement and then you made a decision for whatever reason to close out, but also activities that you may have proposed and we approved, but you never actually move forward with implementing. And you'll want to provide the year approved and implemented, explain why they're closed, and note the year that it was that the activity was closed. Again, explicit dates and a comprehensive description will be very helpful. And as Allison will note in a few moments, the closing details, when you close out an activity and you provide reporting on the progress of that activity when you were implementing it, that will be covered in the annual report. So here we'll just be listing those activities with a very minimal amount of information.
Okay, so next in the annual MTW report, you'll see that the same 4 categories appear as were available in the MTW plan. So starting with the implemented activities, here again you'll provide the year that the activity was first approved and first implemented, recognizing that those may or may not be the same, so please make clear for us what the approved year is and what the implemented year is. Again, as Laurel stated, please make sure that descriptions that are given are clear enough for a reader that's just picking up the document and learning about the activity for the first time, but they're able to understand the flexibilities that you're using and why the activity requires MTW flexibility. Next, in the descriptive section, you'll be providing the standard metric tables, which we'll discuss in the corresponding webcast on utilizing the standard metrics. But you'll also want to provide some descriptive information on comparing the baselines and benchmarks to the outcomes. Here, since you have the outcome information, we're going to want to see if that was on target as you expected, if numbers fell short or went above what you expected. Again, there's no negative consequences for not precisely meeting baselines. Just want to know, how that information in your report is matching up to what you provided in the plan. Next is the section on not yet implemented activities. Here, you'll again be just providing the year that the activity was first approved, as you don't have an implementation date yet. Again, please provide a comprehensive description. And in the report, you'll report on actions that the agency has taken towards implementation in the plan year. So here you would take the timeline or any anticipated steps that you provided under this activity in the plan. You would report on those steps that you actually did take, where in the timeline you are, if that's where you expected to be, and narrative information on that. So again, you'll notice a theme that we're really trying to have the report correspond to the plan so that we can look at both documents and compare them to one another. Next, the activities on hold. Again, as Laurel mentioned, here you'll have a date the activity was approved, implemented, and the year that it was put on hold. Again, we'll ask for a comprehensive description and a discussion of any actions that you take towards implementation in the plan year. Again, as similarly to the prior category, we'll want any timelines or steps that have been taken to relate directly to the information provided in the plan. Finally, the final category is closed out activities. Here, the same date information and descriptive information is required. And then you'll also provide final outcome information. This will be different depending on when the activity was closed out and whether or not the activity was ever implemented. If you have an activity, as Laurel mentioned, that we approved and for whatever reason you never moved forward with, you're not going to have outcome information on that activity as it was never implemented. So you'll just want to provide just brief narrative information on why that outcome information is not available. Similarly, if the activity was closed out a number of years ago when the metric information that we're asking for now was not required and you don't have data on the progress of that activity when it was closed out, that may not be available, and we understand that that's the case. Again, please just provide a description of why the information is not available. We would ask if there's any way to report on any sort of outcome information for those older activities that have been closed out. If there's anything that you can provide from your systems that you do have, we encourage you to provide that in this section, understanding that that might not be possible. So please, again, just explain the situation here and provide what information you can. For those activities that are going to be closed out in the future going forward, we'll require that the final outcome information be reported according to the standard metrics that apply.
So now we're going to talk about the sources and uses of funds section. You'll notice that this section is significantly different than it was in the earlier version of the 5900. Specifically, there's no longer information required on sources and uses of state and local funds or on sources and uses of the central office cost center. And regarding the MTW funding, we are simply asking for a budget in the plan and not asking for year-end financials in the report. And that's because HUD is really going to continue with this form to enhance its efforts to rely on its own data systems. And so thus, we will use FDS year-end data to look at your year-end financials. And the new sources and uses section, we really think will be more streamlined and less work for the PHAs, so we're excited about that. So regarding the sources and uses of MTW funds specifically, the new table is all FDS line items, and the reason that we have formulated the table in that way is to enable comparison to the agency's year-end FDS submission. So for example, if you look at the first line of the sources portion of the table, total tenant revenue equates to FDS line item 70500. And you'll see in parentheses next to this line that 70500 is calculated by summing two other line items. So there's a really clear correlation between what we're asking you for in the FDS, and that will enable a clear comparison of the budget to the actual at the end of the year. Agencies should only report values for the line in total. So in that line 70500, you would just report the total value. You don't need to report on the sub-items that add up to that value. So you wouldn't need to give us values for 70300 or 70400. Next, you'll be describing activities that use only your single fund flexibility. And so this space will give you a place to talk about the ways you're using single fund flexibility, things that are not technically MTW activities because they don't require any other flexibilities from attachment C or D of the agreement. And so you want to highlight those activities that you undertake that only rely on your single fund flexibility. So that's authorization B1 from attachment C and no other waivers. You're reminded that the list of eligible single fund expenditures outlined in authorization B1 are not all items that you can implement with authorization B1 alone. Some of them do require other authorizations, but those are just talking about the ways you can use your funding under MTW. So if it's only using single fund flexibility, you would report it here. If it requires additional authorizations, then it will need to be proposed or included as an activity in sections 3 or 4 of the plan. So next we will talk about the local asset management plan. We tried to set this up in a way that would provide a little bit more clarity from the previous version of the form. So there's a couple of questions. First, you're going to be asked if you're following HUD's existing rules for allocating cost. And then secondly, if the answer is yes, then you're going to say if you're implementing a local asset management plan. The answer can't be yes to both questions. So you're either allocating costs under regulation or you are implementing a local asset management plan. So you're doing one but not both. If a PHA is planning to implement a local asset management plan or has an ongoing local asset management plan, that does need to be included in the plan for approval prior to implementation, and then subsequently each year it will need to continue to be included as an appendix to the plan.
Okay, next we'll move to the sources and uses of funds information required in the annual MTW report. Here you'll see that the information is even more streamlined as Laurel said, we'll be pulling information directly from FDS, trying to cut down on duplicative information that we're requesting from the agencies. So where you provided the budget in the annual MTW plan, we'll look to FDS to compare that to the numbers that you provided there. So in the report, you won't be providing sources and uses of funds in the fiscal year anymore. There will be a section on single fund flexibility. This is similar to that was provided in the plan. Again, as we've been discussing in the plan, you'll discuss those activities using the single fund budget only that you plan to undertake during the plan year. This section of the report will be used to report back on those activities that you actually ended up undergoing and the progress on those activities. Now, with the single fund flexibility, you're not required to obtain approval when that's the only authorization that you're using. So if it's really an activity that requires single fund budget only, it could be the case that you have some entries in the report that were not mentioned in the plan. So again, please just make a notation where that's the case so that when we're comparing the plan to the report, we can make those notations. The local asset management plan information, Laurel went over that. That should be provided in the report as well. And then finally, you'll see a portion on unspent MTW funds. This is the section on reserves that is still undergoing a little bit of work. So you'll notice a notation there that this information does not need to be provided until HUD has provided subsequent guidance on the topic. So until such time as you are notified by our office that guidance is available, you will not need to report on this section. Finally, section 6 is the administrative information. Here in the annual MTW plan, you'll be providing that board resolution that we talked about earlier. The board resolution not only adopts the annual MTW plan or plan amendment itself, but it also adopts the certifications of compliance that are contained within the form. Again, please use those certifications of compliance exactly as they appear in the 5900. Those will need to be provided with the plan only, so with a plan amendment, you'd be just providing the resolutions. You wouldn't need to submit, again, the certifications of compliance. Here you'll also provide information on the public process that was conducted by the PHA. None of the public process requirements themselves are changing. Agencies still must follow those that are in the agreement. This is just some new information that we're using to track to ensure that the public process requirements are being met. So here you would provide any advertisements on your public meetings, the length of the public process, comments and feedback that you received on your document. Next is a description of the formal evaluations of the agency's MTW program and or activities. This is similar to what was in the prior version of the 5900. We would ask that you discuss any arrangements that you have with third-party evaluators, either universities or nonprofits that are evaluating your program and the progress of those evaluations. For some of the newer agencies that have committed to conducting evaluations as a part of the competition under which they were selected, we'll be looking to this section to ensure that the requirements of the notice under which you were selected and the associated sections in your attachment D are being met. Finally, we'll ask that agencies continue to submit their annual statement or performance and evaluation reports. These are the HUD Form 5075.1 for their MTW and non-MTW capital fund grants. So the detail of this will depend on whether how the agency is funding their money. So, those will continue to be provided as they were in the prior version of the 5900.
Great. And in the annual report, we will be asking, as we asked in the previous version, for a general description of HUD reviews, audits, physical inspection issues, and they require the agency to take some kind of action. And we're really including this to provide transparency about the findings of HUD monitoring and then the PHA actions to address any issues. We want that information to be presented in a clear manner, but I think we're just looking to understand generally what is the issue, what is the resolution, and not really looking for a lot of extensive detail or covering of very minor issues. But we do want to continue to include this to provide some transparency. Second, you'll be asked for results of PHA-directed evaluations. So as Allison was noting, that really is more relevant to some of our newer agencies that have formal evaluation structures with external partners in place. So this would only be applicable if you were working with some sort of evaluation entity, very likely externally. And then finally, the annual report will require you to provide a certification that you are continuing to meet the 3 statutory MTW requirements. And so we don't have a prescribed format for that. Many agencies have it as a board resolution. Some have it as just a list of the 3 requirements and then an executive director signature. So we leave discretion to you in terms of what format is most appropriate, but we will continue to provide it, and you would not be considered out of compliance unless we had informed you that there was a compliance issue, now that we will be tracking all 3 of the statutory requirements going forward.
Okay, now just a brief word on the certifications of compliance themselves. Again, those are included as a part of the form, so they are approved by OMB and must appear exactly as they are given in the 5900. We ask the agencies really go over these new certifications of compliance and ensure that all of them are being met. There are a few new ones that have made their way into the form under this newest version, so we just ask that you review that and continue to certify that you're meeting all of those. The certifications of compliance must be signed by the chairman or the secretary of the board of the MTW PHAs legislative body. So that certification that's a little bit of a change in who is eligible to sign that as the authorized entity. We also note that for the certifications of compliance, it's not our intention that you submit any additional information as a result of those certifications, just that you sign it and that you're certifying that you meet all of the elements, but we're not requiring that you submit the documents themselves, such as the materials for affirmatively furthering fair housing and all that. Those are submitted to other program offices in HUD or through your municipality, so that we don't require that those be included as your plan submission, but just the signature that you're meeting those elements is enough for the certification.
Great. So now that we've made it through the entirety of the form, we just wanted to wrap up by noting some other resources where you can go to get some of the documents associated with these trainings, the form, et cetera. So if you go to the 5900 webpage, we have a specific page on our main webpage that talks specifically about the new form, and so the link to that is on this PowerPoint slide. The webpage contains the 5900 FAQ that has been posted and that we'll be continuing to update regularly, links to both the PDF and Excel versions of the form itself, links to this webcast, to the Associated Standard Metrics webcast, and to a handout that will go with the Standard Metrics webcast. So there's going to be a lot of information there, and we recommend that you check out the website for anything you may need relating to these trainings and the webcast. And then finally, if you have any other questions that we haven't covered in the webcast today, we encourage you to send them to MTW info. We will try to answer them as promptly as we can in the FAQ. And we do want to, try to answer every question in a consistent way where all agencies have access to them. So we do encourage you to send your questions to mtw-info@hud.gov. Thank you for viewing the webcast today. We hope that it's helpful. We encourage you, obviously, to view the second part on standard metrics. And we'll be talking with you soon. Thanks.